So recently I've grown quite fond of really digging into the box office, so today I'm going to take a look back at March and look at some of the biggest movies of the month and see what we can take away from those movies, the positive, the negative, and just all of that. Let's go back to the first weekend of March when we saw the premiere of Dune Part 2. Biggest opening domestically of the year. It was awesome. And right now it is sitting at a very nice 627.3 million worldwide, and it's probably going to continue to grow. Maybe could even surpass 700. We'll see how that goes. And yeah, like Warner should be so happy with how everything turned out with Dune. Like just it was kind of a perfect situation, and I think Dune Part 2 is a lot like The Batman from 2022 in the way that it opened towards the start of March and then was able to carry on and do pretty well. I mean, Dune held a lot better than The Batman. Well, The Batman had a massive opening, like bigger than Dune, but at the end of the day, they're kind of both going in very similar directions for where they're gonna wrap up. And to me, that's just really exciting. Warner in general is doing a phenomenal job at marketing right now and marketing its movies to just be these big events. And sometimes that marketing does not work. It didn't really work for The Color Purple. It didn't work for the DCEU, but it did work for Barbie. It worked for Wonka. It worked for Dune. And then it worked for another movie that we're going to talk about later, Godzilla x Kong New Empire. So they're doing a lot of things right. You want movies to be marketed like this event, like you just can't miss it, that you need to see it on the biggest screen possible. I really appreciate as well that Denis learned from the criticisms of the first one, and he built off of that. There wasn't some sort of Twitter campaign for Dune Part 2 where people were like, oh, when did you fall asleep during Dune Part 2? Because no, there's no time where you could fall asleep during that film. And also one movie that I want to talk about, even though it's not a March movie, is Bob Marley, which during that first week of March was the second highest grossing movie. It made $7.4 million that weekend, and right now it has a total of $175.8 million worldwide. It blew right past expectations. Like it obliterated its expectations. And I just want to use this time to talk about biopics and how we have a lot of really big biopics coming out that could also be huge, and just that this is kind of like the new big genre, it seems to be. If you get the right biopic with the right artist, the right star, and the right marketing, you can really have yourself a hit film. And I wouldn't be surprised if Timothée Chalamet's Bob Dylan movie made about as much as Austin Butler's Elvis did. I would not be shocked at all if it was just as big, because one, you got Timothée Chalamet, who's the biggest young star in Hollywood right now, playing Bob Dylan. And I know we've seen other Bob Dylan films, but not with Timothée Chalamet. And I think there's a formula to these biopics in order for the biopic to be successful. I want to just look at Elvis. Elvis made almost like $300 million worldwide. That was insane. And Elvis, he did not treat Priscilla Presley too well, his wife, but that wasn't really portrayed in the movie. The movie really made him look like this amazing person. And I think that helped aid the fact that the movie did so well, because audiences don't want to confront the fact that people that they idolized actually aren't necessarily, pure. And we saw that with Priscilla, which questioned Elvis completely. And Priscilla did not blow up at the box office like Elvis did. It was a much smaller film. And yes, did it have its fans? But people hated that film. I made a Priscilla review, and there were so many people commenting how they loved Elvis and how Elvis didn't do any of those terrible things. Like, maybe he didn't do everything that the Priscilla movie showed, but there is no way that he didn't do any of it. Moving on to the second weekend, where we had Kung Fu Panda open up to 58 million, and now it is at a really solid 346.1 million worldwide, and I expect it very soon to just begin to plateau at the box office, kind of like Migration did. make a consistent like 3 to 4 million a weekend throughout April, just because it's an animated film. It's gonna stick around. People want to take their kids to the movies because it's a good way to get your kids out of the house but not put that much effort into it, so there's gonna be an audience for Kung Fu Panda until the Garfield movie, and I really expect this film to ride it out pretty successfully at the box office, and that's really exciting. But the flaw is that the animation market so far this year has been really untapped, and I kind of was looking into it because we had a really interesting year with animation last year where we had some really big successes like Spider-Verse and like Mario, but Disney flopped in terms of animation last year. Elemental and Wish both did not do so well. And I think that's just because Disney Animation and Pixar have set the standard for themselves, that they make the best animated movies. So when you see reviews that they're subpar or standard and feature a character that you've never heard of, you're not gonna bother seeing the film if it's not that good to begin with. So I'm hoping, expecting that something like Inside Out 2 will get people back to the theaters to go and watch a Pixar movie and experience the magic of that, and then want to keep going the next Pixar or Disney animated movie comes out. But anyways, like the formula to me in terms of having like a really successful animated film, theatrical release is one of two things, and it's very simple. You either need really solid reviews, like Migration, like The Bad Guys from a few years ago, just really good reviews that can hold up your film, and people are like, oh, like this is an animated film that I can watch with my kids, and it's not gonna suck. Or you have beloved characters that are just so loved, where even if the movie is just kind of seen as okay, people are going to watch it anyways, like Kung Fu Panda 4, like Mario, which made billions of dollars. But the perfect happy medium is if you get both. And that's when you get your Puss in Boots: The Last Wish or Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. We're going to jump the third weekend because no real big film came out that weekend unless you want to count like Arthur the King. So moving on to the fourth weekend of March, you have Ghostbusters: Frozen Empire. And Ghostbusters: Frozen Empire, I think, is probably the most interesting film box office-wise to talk about, because I don't know whether or not to call it a success, a failure, or just something in the middle. Because yes, did Ghostbusters have a $100 million budget, and will it make that budget up? No, it's not gonna make that budget up theatrically. It's already crossed $100 million. It's at, like, I think 108.4 worldwide right now, and it had a huge opening at 45 million. But it fell really hard this past weekend, and it's not going to be able to compete against Godzilla, and I'm sure it's going to end up falling below Kung Fu Panda in like a weekend or two. So yeah, I doubt Ghostbusters is going to stick around for much longer. But projections were not fond of Ghostbusters. They did not have Ghostbusters opening at 45. Most projections were under 40. I even heard some people thinking that this movie would barely break 30. So the fact that it opened up with 45 is pretty impressive, and you gotta give it that. And I think overall, my takeaway with Ghostbusters is that, is it a win for the Ghostbusters franchise? No. And I think that there's a good chance that this is the last Ghostbusters movie that we get, maybe even ever. But I do think it's a win for theaters, and I think it is a win just for the fact that people want to go to the movies. Out of all the films that I've talked about on here, they've all broken projections. They've all exceeded expectations. So people obviously want to go to the movies, and they at least want to see IP films. And what's going to be interesting about April is that we don't have IP films coming out. So we're going to talk about that soon, but I want to jump to the final weekend of March, this past weekend, for Godzilla x Kong, and just kind of reiterate what I was saying about Dune, because Dune, they marketed it like an event. They did a very similar thing for Godzilla, and it worked out so well for them. It shattered expectations. I think most people had it as a high of 65. It's at 80. And after just one weekend, it's at 195.1 worldwide. This film could cross 1 billion worldwide, which would be insane, but I could totally see it. Franchises like Godzilla and like Dune are the franchises that people want to go see. Franchises where you don't need to do a lot of catch up, or it's the type of franchise that you can kind of jump right into in the middle of it and you'll be fine. Kind of like Fast and Furious, but I think Fast and Furious at this point has just kind of overstayed its welcome. But Godzilla X Kong, you know, Godzilla's been around as like this kaiju monster for almost 100 years, and people still want to go see Godzilla movies. So I don't think people will necessarily get tired of Godzilla. Make more movies like this, where it's just big monsters fighting each other and you can sit there and watch it for 2 hours and turn your brain off, because people obviously want that. And yeah, so now I just want to kind of talk about April, because April, like I was saying, is going to be really different, because it's all original films for the biggest films of April. You know, we got Monkey Man. Yeah, you do have The First Omen. That's really the closest thing that we have to a franchise film coming out for April, which is, I guess, a prequel to this movie called The Omen, but I had never even heard of The Omen until a couple of weeks ago. So I would not be surprised if some people went to go and see The First Omen, not knowing that The Omen is a thing, you know? And after that, you know, you have Civil War, you have Challengers, you have Boy Kills World, just a lot of films that aren't necessarily franchise releases. And since you don't have these big franchise releases coming out in April, it's going to be really interesting for the movie industry as a whole. Because if these movies underperform, you know, if the majority of these films just don't do too well, that's a really bad sign for original movies in Hollywood. Because really, this upcoming month is one of the biggest swings Hollywood has taken at actually making new content in years. So if you are an advocate for original Hollywood movies, go and see some of these films. And a lot of them also just look to be really good. You know, it's not like we're going to see mediocre or bad original films. Like, no, this is going to be such a fun month, and I can't wait to review these films. I can't wait to talk about the end of this month, and when I look back at the box office and be like, all right, so what are the takeaways? Like, are we going to get more original movies after this, or is that kind of dead in the water? And are we just going to get more marches where it's mostly IP-driven films? We'll find out. And I'm excited, but I'm also nervous. But what about all of you? I touched up on a lot this video, so if you have any thoughts, please feel free to let me know in the comments down below. I want to start a conversation about what I've talked about today. And while you're down there, if you like this video, feel free to like, subscribe, do whatever you gotta do. I'll see you all in the next one. Take care.